Hi guys, we are back to continue with our chapter 7. So we have already discussed the two elements in terms of strategic implementation. We have discussed previously in the earlier video the elements of annual objective and how important is the annual objective towards realizing the achievement of our long-term objective and also the vision and mission. And we have also discussed on the policy. The element of policy is important in order to speed up the decision-making process. It is being designed in order to serve as guidelines in order for organization to make decision. And in these particular slides, you can look into in terms of several issues that might require a management policy. Smoking, sexual harassment, and then we have here to use one or more suppliers. So those are some of the policies being implemented in the organization. The third element, we talk about resource allocation. This is a central management activity that allows for strategic execution, often based on political or personal factors for firms who do not use strategic management approach, meaning that when you don't use this scientific approach in order for you to distribute the resources within your departments, sometimes people are often going to use based on their political or personal factors. They would give to their favorite departments a little bit more as compared to non-favorite departments, for example. And then strategic management enables resources to be allocated according to priorities established by annual objectives. So there are four types of resources. We talk about financial, physical, human, and technological, and we have discussed about this in chapter 4. Because we are discussing about how resources are very limited, and sometimes this limitation of resources can create conflict. So now we are going to discuss in terms of how you as a manager can manage conflict in your organization. So what is conflict? Conflict is a disagreement between two or more parties on one or more issues. For example, establishing annual objective can lead to conflicts. Why do you impose on my department this KPI, whereas you post a little bit easier and much reasonable KPI for the rest of other departments? So that can become a conflict. Kenapa kita nak kena publish 10 paper tapi lecturer dekat fakulti lain nak kena publish 3 paper, for example. That is a conflict that might occur in any faculties, for example. So establishing that annual objective alone definitely can lead to conflict. So how we as a manager needs to do in order for us to deal with the conflict. Even at home at the moment also sometimes we have conflicts with our siblings. I believe that in some household sometimes we need to share. Saya tak bercakap atas dasar apa-apa, sekadar contoh saja. Kadang-kadang kita nak kena bahagikan masa, nak share, because kita punya equipment, kita punya komputer, kita ada 1 biji, 2 biji saja dekat komputer, dekat rumah. And then ada abang yang nak kena belajar, ada adik yang nak kena belajar sekolah menengah, ada adik bungsu pula dekat sekolah rendah. Semuanya masing-masing nak gunakan komputer. That also can create conflict. Dan kita pun nak guna juga komputer. Kita pun ada kita punya assignment. So meaning to say that yes, that is a basic conflict that might occur at our home. So if we take this into the organizational setting, there are 3 ways that you can do in order to deal with conflicts. The first one is avoidance. I believe that at home also sometimes our parents are trying to manage the conflict through these approaches. For example, they try to ignore the problems and hopes that the conflict will resolve by itself, or physically separating the conflicting individuals. They ask you to go into your room, they ask your brother to go into his room, and then after some times things will be okay. Or you go and report to your parents, to your mom, your brother go to report to your father, and they just ignore both of you. They don't do anything until the issue becomes unrelevant anymore. So that's what it means by avoidance. As manager, also as the head of the faculty, sometimes I'm also doing this, and because when I receive complaints from my students or with regards to anything, for sometimes if I find that complaint is irrelevant, or sometimes when I receive a complaint from my lecturers, and when I think that the complaint is irrelevant at the moment, so we just give it some time, and you will see that the complaint will go away. And then we have a diffusion, where you need to include playing down differences between conflicting parties while accentuating similarities and common interests. We try, when we talk to person A, we try to identify what are the similarities and common interests. Yes, awak nak belajar, kakak pun nak belajar, abang pun nak belajar, kan? So maybe we need to come up with a simple jadual waktu, kan? Time frame jadual untuk gunakan komputer, for example. So it would be fair. And if it does not work, so then we do the confrontation, exemplified by exchanging members of conflicting parties so that each can gain an appreciation of others' point of view, or holding a meeting at which conflicting parties present their views and work through their differences. Sometimes maybe you need to use a little bit more time with the computer, because you need to deliver and submit an important assignment that would jeopardize your grades if you are not able to submit it during a stipulated time period being given by your lecturers. So maybe during the confrontation stage, you can convince your brother that on Monday you need to have an extra 1 hour because you need to do this, or every Friday you need to use a little bit more time because you need to submit this assignment, and because the due date is every Friday. So maybe perhaps through this confrontation face to face, he or she can look at your body gestures, your facial expression, and maybe you can resolve the conflicts among yourself. So that's how we as managers can deal with conflicts. So we have 3 approaches. Number 1 is try to avoid, let it solve it by itself, or we try to separate them both. And number 2, we try to diffusion. We try to play around with the positivity, with the similarities, with the common interests that might have occur between conflicting parties. If it is not working, then we try to do confrontation. All right. So the next element that we are going to discuss with implementation of the strategy, one of the important element when it comes to implementation of the strategy is that you need to structure your organization, and that's why we want you to incorporate organizational chart into your group project, into your that written report for that 25%, because the structure of the organization is very important to determine whether or not you are able to deliver or achieve your intended objectives. So here we are going to discuss several of the organizational structure, but I'm going to go through this very quickly, because I believe that we have learned about this many times, few times before, and in management subjects, basic management subjects, during our diploma, or when we do our first or second semester in the degree period, inshallah. But if you have any question, you can always text me later on. So these are the symptoms of an ineffective organizational structure. If you have too many levels, it would delay decision making. When you have too many meetings, sometimes you would take a lot of time. And then when too much attention being directed towards solving interdepartmental conflicts, you might lose the importance of fulfilling our long-term objective. Too large span of control, like myself, under the faculty, we have 160 lecturers, so I have a large span of control. whereas in different faculties, they only have like 38 number of lecturers under the supervision of the KPP, so the span of control is much smaller. So the first structure that we have is a functional structure. We base on the function. So this is the most basic one. And then you can look at the advantages and disadvantages. I want you to look through all these advantages and disadvantages and come back to me if you have any question with regards to the advantages and disadvantages. And then we have divisional structure, and then we have the SBU structure, and the most complex one, we have the matrix structure. This is the most complex one because under this structure, we as an employee, if we are being located here, as an employee here, why does a matrix structure is complicated? Because you need to report to two different bosses. So for this one, you need to report to this boss, and at the same time, you also need to report to this project manager. So having two bosses is quite difficult because they might not be thinking alike. They might have different opinions and objectives. So it's going to be to make things a little bit more difficult. But what type of organizations that use this type of matrix structure? Sometimes in factory or in construction, for example, they used to have this type of structure because before you can do your tiling, you need to ensure that you get permission from the structure manager, for example, to make sure that all the structures are intact so that you can move on with the rest of the work in building up that house ataupun for that particular structure. Alright, I will stop here first, and then we will continue with our last video on chapter 7 next.